This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. I'm going to start that over. Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make an episode happen by joining at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. I put the emphasis on help us.
I saw that.
As if it's like a code to the listener that we're actually under duress here.
Since you read this every episode, it's good to change up the enunciation.
What did you say?
Enunciation.
Oh, okay. I thought you said enunciation.
That's how you enunciate it.
That's how you enunciate it.
You add another T.
I don't think that's true, but let's go with that.
It's like tsunami.
Oh, is it?
T. Yeah.
Like czar?
Right.
Got it. All right. We are joined this week by the dynamic duo, the Batman and Robin, the whatever combinations, the Ace and Gary. There we go. Of the Dig Me Out podcast. Welcome back, Steven Musinski, Vadim Taver. How you doing, guys?
Pretty good. Awesome. Thanks for having us.
A couple of patrons here to talk about a band that Steven picked. It's a band that we've already talked about. Was way back episode 350. So like halfway through the show, essentially, because we're at episode 600 and a dozen or so here. So that's about halfway through the show at this point. I won't give it away yet. Steven, please introduce to the audience the album that you picked for this episode.
We picked an album from 1994 called Ignaurus by Into Another. The album before the one y'all did previously, Seamless.
Correct. Now, I had a trouble. I was trying to pronounce that album title a couple different ways. I was like, Ignoramus?
Ignoramus?
Is that a dinosaur I'm not aware of? Like, what is going on?
Steve pointed that out this week.
I was like, am I going to have to remind him of that?
Well, now that you said it, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's sort of like the word Siobhan and the spelling of Siobhan make no sense, but I somehow remember that, so I will remember this. But yes, we reviewed Seamless, which came out on Hollywood Records in 1995. This album, as you mentioned, came out in 94. This was on Revelation Records, which also put out their self-titled debut in 1991. Between them, they had an EP. I'm sure we covered this on the previous episode. We did some history of the band. How did you guys discover Into Another?
Well, I was told about Into Another from a friend named Andrew Truss. Shout out to my old friend Andrew Truss. But he was shown Into Another by this guy sitting right next to me. So that's how it came into my world. You wanna tell them how you found it?
Sure. Yeah. So I worked for Revelation Records much later. So if we need any background, I can provide a little bit there.
We might.
There's a compilation, Revelation 50, the 50th title in their catalog called In Flight compilation, and those things used to be pretty popular in the 90s. I don't know how much people actually listen to like, I guess, mixes you could do on streaming services, but there was like a In Flight Records or In Flight Revelation Records compilation that had an Into Another song on it that I got, which was actually recorded in the same sessions as Ignaurus, but it was from a 7-inch they had put out shortly after this one right here. This is Herbivore, but the song on that compilation was called To Be Free, and those two songs were recorded in the same session as Ignaurus and did not make the album. So that was the first time I heard it. That was 1997, and I think they had just broken up, so I missed them when they were around the first time.
fun fact, the song To Be Free is also on a Russian cassette compilation of punk, hardcore, emo, and indie, including such bands as Sick of It All, Less Than Jake, Earth Crisis. So there you go. If you have that, you have a rare, lesser, not a non-album track. Is that a non-album track? Is that what we call it?
Yeah.
Jay, obviously we're familiar with this band because we already talked about them once.
We did. Yep.
We did. I had to go back though, and I didn't really listen to the review, but I just listened to the album again because I kind of had a solid memory of what that sounded like in the general sense, but I didn't like remember the specifics, like what the vocalist sounded like, the guitar tones, that kind of stuff. So I went back and listened to it. Did you resample that older album?
I thought about it and I decided not to. Because I listened to this couple times and had some opinions that I didn't want to necessarily like qualify or change depending on what the album sounded like, reminding myself of what the album sounded like after this. So I decided to just go with this one and see where it leads us.
Gotcha. Now, it sounds like they were together for only a short time in the 90s. Well, about 5 years based on their release just history. But they did reunite in 2012 for the Revelation Records 25-year anniversary. Did you go to that? Were you working there then?
I did. I have the poster for it right to my side. I should have brought that up. And then I also have it into another poster right behind this as well, which you can't see. Yeah, I did. And so in a nutshell, the band, it was, no one really thought that they would get back together because their bass player, who's a very prominent member of the band, had passed away. So basically nobody thought that they would get back together. And my understanding is a couple guys approached them and said, "Hey, we love Into Another so much, and we learned all the songs. We know the songs," and they just wanted to see if the other guys would be on board and trying to get the band back together. And so that's what happened when they couldn't find Peter Moses, the guitar player, originally. I guess it took them a while to track him down and get him on board. So the reunion is three of the three original guys plus these two new guys that had nothing to do with the band in their initial run.
To some people out there, hearing that they couldn't find a band member, they might be like, "What? He was in your band?" But I couldn't find my drummer right now if I needed to. Like, I have no idea where he is. I know I know what city he's in, but I don't know where he is.
I saw him in person a couple months ago. He exists.
He does?
Yes. The legend exists.
The legend.
Real.
The legend exists. Let's get into some comments over at Patreon. We'll share the results of the poll, which I forgot to change the end date. So the poll's technically still going. We'll see where we end up. I'll tell you where we are when this episode wraps up. But we got some comments. Bill Davidson said, "I'm out of my element on this one. There's more compositional depth to this band than I expected. The quieter numbers like Two Snowflakes, William, and Anxious were surprising." And then he said, "By the way, it was easier for me to listen to this album on Bandcamp than Spotify." Okay, not sure why that happened, but interesting. Darren Lehman said, "This album has some really cool sounds and some great ideas, but I prefer the softer, more subtle parts of the record versus the harder, edgier parts." Okay. Ian McIver said, "My mother told me if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. I will say that there is some decent musicianship here at times, and less is more, better EP." Well, that's not bad. That's, it's not a decent single or a coaster, which, by the way, we got to add coaster to not even worth listening to.
That's harsh.
I know. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe in the spirit of reconciliation and the country coming together, we should not go with a coaster option.
Let's wait until we actually listen to an album that's worthy of it, and then we'll bust that out.
How do you know it's not this one?
When it's needed. It might be. Stay tuned.
Kidding. There's no coasters on this episode. I'm just gonna say that. Sean Brown made a comment, but I think it was in regard to our poll because it referenced Buffalo Tom. So I'm not. We're gonna skip over that one. Willie Dillon said the musicianship and recording quality are quite good, though I don't love when he pushes his voice. Okay, interesting. And Gavin said, I hadn't heard this and didn't mind it. I've chosen an EP as I tired a little as it focused more on their metal element towards the end. Okay. Those are the comments on Ignaurus. I almost forgot how to pronounce that right before I said it. Ignaurus by Into Another. Jay, tell me something you liked about this record.
There is a lot going on. And this is why I didn't want to listen to the record after, because I don't remember being hit with so many different sounds and ideas. I don't remember the vocalist being this unique. The closest I could describe him as on this record is like Craig Wedren combined with Geddy Lee.
How about Andy Wood?
Okay,
Thank you.
I A-B'd Mother Love Bone in this, and I was like, holy crap.
Okay. The phrasing is so complex at times. I think that's where I was getting the Shudder to think.
Yes.
But musically, there's a ton of different guitar sounds, types of playing, textures. I guess underneath it all, which is cool, is it's to me sounds like post-hardcore. It's got heavy riffs, it can be angular, but then it I think broadens into, I guess, a progressive rock kind of feel. I hear things like Pink Floyd and even some like late 80s, early 90s prog metal like Fate's Warning on the song Drowning. So all kinds of twists and turns I did not expect. It can be aggressive, it can be a little folky at times. It just covers so much. There's so much to process and take in. It grabs you right away by how unique it is, but I think with each listen you pick up on new things and you start to it's got little earworm hooks and parts in it too that you pick up on that wear well as you listen more. The last thing I'll say is I think Steven shared a live video of the band and it helped concrete in my mind just how amazing the guitar playing is. Especially since in the video there's only one guitar player, which on the record you can't necessarily say for sure. There's some really cool riffs, great tones. The guitar solos in Drowning, Maritime Murder, and William are like guitar virtuoso, like Joe Satriani style guitar solos from you know what I mean?
Or
Guitar records, Shrapnel Records or something. Again, not necessarily anticipating that when you first get into the record that we're going to go there, but we do, and I think seeing it live was really cool too, because I think on record there's a lot of effects and stuff, and you're not quite sure how much of it is overdub, but seeing them do it live was pretty remarkable, especially for 1993. This sounds very ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Eternity, will no one free?
So that's some of the stuff I liked. How about you, Tim?
I just want to start with, this is one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had, because I was so confused that's the reason why I went back to that record, because I was like,
okay,
I don't remember this band sounding like
yeah.
like this, like Rush meets, yeah, like you said, like this is so weird. And Steve Vai and Mother Love Bone and all these things are like coming together in this weird stew. And I started going to pages like on Discogs. You go to the album page and it says genre rock, style alternative rock, emo. Okay, whatever. You go to All Music, whatever. There is not one that mentions progressive rock. And this is dripping. If you took the name of the band off and just put that cover as it is on there, and you were like, this band formed in the 90s and they're really into Dream Theater, I'm like, oh yeah, I can definitely tell there's like a progressive rock element, but it's like it's 90s indie rock. Like never would have thought that this was just like a straight post-hardcore indie rock band.
You see them live and you're like, oh, this is a hardcore band.
Because there is like jazz fusion guitar runs on this record.
Yeah.
That I was sitting here listening to it before we recorded, and my wife was sitting behind me, and she just like turned and looked at me at one point, and she goes, "Did he just say Ghost Pirates wait at sea for me?" And I was like, I think that he did. And then I went and looked up the lyrics, and I was like, this is a Jethro Tull song. This is about a mariner.
Yeah.
This like trapped on an island in the weed and the need of a friend. You're a friend, understand. Truth lives in a house on the borderland. Love rules the nightstand. The ghost pirates wait at sea for me. Like, what? This is not what I expected lyrically. So my mind was like struggling for days to try to understand what I'm listening to, because I would just be like, what was that guitar solo? Like it wouldn't be long, but there would be these leads and that tone. I mean, it sounded like a PRS that or something that Steve Vai's I don't know what Steve Vai plays, but an Ibanez. Like it had such that tone. Like it was not a Les Paul or but then I go watch the video and I'm like, what is he playing?
It looks like a 16-year-old kid playing a Les Paul. You're just like, what? Wait, what?
It makes no sense.
This isn't matching up.
So in that respect, it's a lot of fun because I know the ingredients from like the post-hardcore indie emo level, but when you throw in, the weird progressive elements with time signatures and lyrically, and then his vocal gets very dramatic at times in a way that, again, when on the next record in Seamless, I did not get that same sort of flair from him. It's very competent. I mean, it's a good vocal for the style, especially, but like the dramatic theatric flair in some of the vocal deliveries on this record is just like, I'm just like, I don't know what the hell this is. I don't know. I don't understand what is going on. I've listened to this a dozen times, and I'm not sure that I have a cognate opinion of this, and I'm not sure I ever will. But it's a fascinating listen because of that. So let's go to Steven. Since you picked this record, I'm gonna start with you first. Tell me what works best for you on this record.
Everything. I mean, but it wasn't always that way. I mean, I was shown this record a long time ago, and I had a lot of similar immediate reactions that I'm hearing from you guys. Like, this is weird. What is this? Like, what am I listening to? And I don't know that I was always fully ready for it. I would find my way into the band a little bit more with Seamless. Right. We've got that record is their Hollywood Records, their major label. Go. Let's talk about the title of this record, Ignaurus. It was them just having a little bit of fun. They're from New York City, and they were watching, Quicksand and Shift and all these other bands were getting picked up by majors. But they were just doing their own thing, and so they just had a little bit of fun with naming the album Ignaurus. But I think it ended up being a pretty powerful statement in the end, because I don't know, when I come back to this record now, I hear, and now that I'm much more familiar with the band's work, if you listen to their discography in chronological order, you could hear their development, and by the time they get to Ignaurus, it literally, to me, sounds like, as a listener, you get, and I think they even said this, so it's a great time to be an Into Another fan, because the band has appeared on a podcast called Where It Went, which is a podcast that dissects the Revelation Records catalog in order. And so they've now successfully talked about all of the Revelation Records, and Seamless too, that actually made its way in the door because Rev did the vinyl for Seamless. So they talk about how, like when you listen to the record, you're kind of just put in the center of these four musicians, and they just made the record that they wanted to make. And it's so raw, and it's so vulnerable and naked, and actually Richie Birkenhead, the singer, he calls it that in one of the episodes, like, and I can't agree with that description more. It's just, from the very start, the opening of those bass notes, and the instruments just kind of come in and they ebb and they flow, and there's so many heavy groove parts on this record that would have been so easily to double and triple and start adding some layers of guitar on there, but they're not there. You just get Peter Moses chunking it out when it's time to chunk it out, and then you said, Jay, ripping a virtuoso solo, like, oh, let me add some classical guitar. The crazy thing is, also, let me talk about the tone real quick. Tim, you just addressed, this was played through a Les Paul into a Soldano head, both of which were borrowed. He played most of this record on a borrowed Les Paul, which really, I think, just only further speaks to his ability as a player. And if I could just narrow it down to one thing, just simply listening to the interplay between Tony Bono and Peter Moses on the guitar, it's phenomenal. There are just so many parts, even just like weird little transitional parts, where you're like, wait, what just happened? What did they just do there? Tony will play some like weird dissonant chord on the bass, and Peter's twinkling through some chord, and then boom, next thing you know, they're into something else. And that interplay is found all over the record, but the drums just hold it down. The drums just kind of stay solid, and not too many note choices, because everybody else is kind of going nuts with what they're doing. The comment that said there is some exceptional musicianship at times here, I take extreme umbrage with that comment. I think there's a lot that you can say about this record, but the exceptional playing and the talent, it pours throughout the entire thing. I think that this is just exceptional musicianship across the board. And it is the gift that keeps giving. Like you said, Jay, like, you just, something new will constantly reveal itself to you when you listen to this record, whether you take it in through headphones or crank it on a speaker. It's, I don't know. There's so many things I love about it. I could go on and on. But I'll just leave it at that for now. Pass it to you, Vadim.
Pass the ball.
Yeah, well, you guys covered the most of it. For me, the main thing was always guitar from the very beginning. I mean, I'm first and foremost a guitarist myself, and Peter Moses' playing is just unbelievable. So you guys probably know this from listening to a ton of music and being musicians yourself. Oftentimes what happens is when you have somebody that goes to school for music. Peter Moses went to school for classical guitar. Oftentimes those guys spend so much time practicing that they're virtuosos. They can play back anything. They can shred 1,000 notes a second, but give them a song to write and they can't. They have trouble writing, especially if it's simple. Like they want to make it as complicated as possible. And something that just incredibly impresses me with Peter Moses every single time I listen to it is not just how exceptional he plays, the level of technicality, but also the creative, the creativeness of the playing itself is, the phrasing and what Jay said, some of the solos reminded him of like a virtuoso like Joe Satriani or Steve Vai or something like that. But I want to make sure that the audience who listens to this don't think that in that he's just shredding the entire time. He's just playing like sweeps and all this kind of stuff, because what he does is so melodic. The more you listen to this album, the more you find that you can hum back and sing back the melodic guitar lines. And that's something also that Bernard Butler from Suede used to do, which I also really appreciated. I like him a lot as a guitar player too. Just very melodic playing, very precise, and oftentimes is a very good complement to what the vocals are doing. But the musicianship definitely in every member of this band is just exceptional. The way they play together. So those are the things I like the most. I also just want to address a couple things that you guys mentioned about the lyrics specifically. Tim, you said some of the lyrics are just very strange and all that kind of stuff. So just a little bit of a background, I guess. Richie's mother, he grew up in New York City, and his mother wrote musicals. So he was raised in a pretty musical family. From what I understand, he's a big fan of a lot of musicals and also a lot of like old jazz standards. He mentioned Cole Porter was one of his biggest influences from way back when, as far as lyricists go, and also being influenced by children's stories. And you can kind of get that a lot, like in Anxious at the final track, where he's talking about imagining you having as a human having like animal parts and having wings and having gills and all this kind of stuff. And like you said about the ghost ship. So there's that element of fantasy, I think, that comes in, probably something to do influence from his upbringing. And then also being very influenced by David Bowie and Pink Floyd. You guys mentioned Pink Floyd, which, David Bowie's lyrics definitely kind of go outside the realm of what's considered like normal lyrics. So that's probably where that comes from. And then just one last thing before I let you guys take over is that the Peter Moses, what's really incredible about him to me is that this was his first real band, the guitarist. I guess he's played in some local bands that haven't really done anything, but it was a complete coincidence how this whole band even came together, because Richie and Drew, the drummer, they came from hardcore. They came from these classic 80s hardcore bands. It was Richie from Underdog, and then Youth of Today, and then Drew from Bold. And then there was these two other guys. And the two other guys came from a more metal background. But in hardcore, a lot of times that didn't mix. You didn't really have, oftentimes you would find players and you would play sort of like with guys that are within the scene. And I think that that's really awesome that they sort of reached out from that. They wanted to do something different. And so to do that, they decided to play with guys who are not involved from hardcore. They didn't have this sort of same background that they did. And therefore they can bring completely different influences to the table and make a sound that is to this day still incredibly unique. Steve mentioned Ignaurus was kind of a play on words, ignore us, because all their friends were getting signed to major labels at the time, and it seemed like they eventually got signed, but it took them much longer. But that also had a lot to do with crowd reactions, where I think a lot of people who went to see them, they kind of expected it to be more of like a hardcore type band, which is the scene that two of them came from, and also the albums were on Revelation, but they didn't know what to do. So a lot of people, they were like, what is going on? What is this? But the four of them playing live, is what this record sounds like with that level of precision and technicality. They just wowed everybody that saw them play. So even though, you guys kind of joked around about the lyrics being like funny, imagine being in a room with a couple hundred people singing along every word. So those are doing their best to mimic Richie's insane range. It works. And that's the thing that makes you want to go back to this band, for me at least.
What you said about him coming from a theater background, that completely makes sense now, because a lot of these are they're character driven, stories, instead of them being, when I think about like Jawbox lyrics, they're not, to me, they're not stories. He's weaving, interesting lyrics together for a point, but like, William, for example, like the one that I brought up, like there's something happening there as far as like telling a tale, which would work in that theatrical setting. And also why, like on Anxious, like that could have been out of a musical from, actually funny. That was when my wife, who was sitting behind me listening, she got up and goes, that's it for me. And she walked out of the room.
I wish that I had killed a pair of antennae, an exoskeleton. I wish I had wings on me. And if I grew fur, imagine the luxury. Yeah. To fight you oh so lovingly. Wish I had scales like a reptile. Yeah, I wish that I had gills. No one would ever know how I stay under.
So she will not be falling on the worthy album end of the spectrum. But yeah, that's all great background because it helps fill in and like sort of more make sense of what I was hearing because I was so confused by it. And you're right. This isn't, I think when Jay and I mentioned Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, it's not to mean like, it's not like there's constant soloing over the record. It's just like when they do take these little moments to throw in those runs, you're just hearing that precision and that tone of those guys, which was completely unexpected.
Yeah, it's that kind of competence with a solo, which you wouldn't expect to hear from a band that's, sort of in a post-hardcore. Like, yes, there's some great guitar players in those bands, but like, there's just, like you said, a tone and a precision and technique that is unusual in some of those solos, which I enjoyed.
It's whatever. I mean, I don't know what the scales are for the songs. I haven't broken them down, but the way that he's using the scale, like I can tell, that dude's been taught to play guitar. He didn't learn listening to like a Bad Brains album. Like that kid has sat down and done pentatonic scales and Meridian and whatever the hell else, the chlamydia and all the other scales.
Those are modes. The modes. Yeah.
Modes. Jay and I have. Jay, did you take a single guitar lesson?
I did.
Oh, you did? I didn't know you were taught.
I took him for a couple years, and then I quit and forgot everything, and then relearned it all myself.
Okay, sure.
I did.
What about drums? Did you learn drums from anybody?
No.
Has anybody ever learned drums from a professional drummer? Or does everybody just get a pillow and start banging in their room to a Cheap Trick?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happens.
I mean, I have friends who say they give lessons, but I've never met any students. So
right.
Right. Anyway, Jay, was there anything about this record that didn't work for you?
Well, it's a grower. I think there's some things about it that in particular when they get a little softer, slower, more folky, it's a scratcher, and I'm not quite sure. It makes me have weird feelings in my tummy.
Are you talking about Two Snowflakes or?
Yeah, even the verses in Running into Walls, I'm like, wow, we're kind of lilting here. This is different. Anxious has some moments like that. But they all end up having redeeming parts, even though they might take a left turn into something that's a little weird or unexpected, and both stylistically, lyrically, just technique, sound. So those moments took me a while, but I think if you're in for the whole journey of the song and the whole journey of the record and like what it's in whole about, it makes sense. William's a good example. Like there's parts of that song that kind of drag and I don't love, but then you get to the guitar solo and part, and it's incredible. So it kind of makes the other parts of the song have a purpose to get you there. So yeah, I mean, there's some things here and there, especially on early listens, that I didn't love, but I think with repeated listens, I found myself kind of pulled into them. So that's about what didn't work for me.
Yeah. As I went through this record over and over, I'm like, oh, two snowflakes is like their Battle of Evermore, like,
yeah,
or Going to California or something.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
it's such, and it, again, because I was confused. I was like, I thought this band was from 1994, not 1974. I'm confused why this sounds like this. It is like a jolt. I mean, you got to like pay attention when stuff's happening, because it's from the vocal runs that he's doing at times to the guitar parts to and then the way that the bass and the drums lock up with some really weird stuff, time signature wise.
You know who else, before I forget, I think the first singer that came to mind, and maybe first band that we haven't talked about, is Mike Patton.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what I was gonna say.
That was my first, like, oh, this is like Mike Patton, like maybe like a Mr. Bungle kind of thing, but it's not that. I don't know. I find this more musical, or more coherent.
Also had some Peter
sense to me.
Gabriel era Genesis.
Yes. So it has that level of like, I mean, which Mike Patton does the same thing, right? I mean,
Right.
he can
Oh,
sing a
yeah.
ballad, he can be like turn on a dime, he can do metal, like, you know. So that was my first connection of like, okay, I think this is where this is going. It was more in that space.
Oh yeah, when the first, I remember the first two songs, and I was like, are we gonna get like a polka song on this record, or like?
But they don't do that, which I love.
I was very happy, because I very much respect Mr. Bungle, but it's not something that I listen to on a casual basis.
We're not going to the circus, you know.
Right.
We're not going back to the 1800s. Like,
You just feel like having a seance.
Right. I do think some of the songs, like, to me, this would, like, in the way that Led Zeppelin 4 is 4 songs and 4 songs, like, I feel like this is it holds my attention and then like lulls at times, because these songs are when things become so complex and weird, and then when you release from that, like that release sometimes is like disorienting how and then it's like quiet, so like you get like 5 minutes of like an acoustic. It doesn't hold my attention quite as well. So maybe like a song like Anxious or William would be better at 3 minutes instead of 5 minutes. But there's nothing I dislike. It's just, I don't know that I'll ever really wrap my head around what this record is, and that it came out in our decade. So, is there anything that you guys don't like about this record? Is there possibly anything?
Boy, for me, no, not at this point. I mean, like I said, it is a grower, so you know, I didn't always love this record, but I think once you let it reveal itself to you, yeah, for me, it's a perfect record. It's 9 songs, and I take the journey with the band. In preparing for this, I got to go camping, and I was at a really beautiful place outside, and I love to listen to an album in the same setting by day, and then do it again by night. And for my night listen of this album last night, with the moon, wasn't full, but it was a perfectly clear desert sky, so the moon was just so bright, and I was right there with Richie the whole time, and when he belts them out, I felt like belting him out at the moon with him. I want to talk a little bit more about his lyrics. He is definitely a storyteller, but a lot of them come from very personal places. And you can hear him talk pretty sincerely about it on any of those interviews. Again, shout out to the Where It Went podcast for sitting and talking with those guys as much as they did. And like songs like Running Into Walls and Poison Fingers he, he's this goes back to the vulnerability of this record, and he's talking about his childhood, and he experienced some levels of abuse and growing up, and so he's woven little lyrical stories about that, but if you really dig in there and you really read along, it's so profound to me, and it's so emotional, and I never hear anything that he does. It's so funny, you brought up Andy Wood, which I'm so glad you did, because I was trying to think about how this would appeal to you guys, knowing that you guys are like some 80s rock heads that found your way into the 90s. Like, I think about Van Halen a lot lately when I'm listening to this, and I think about like just 4 really talented musicians playing in a rock band together, each at the top level of their own craft. And I'm like, this is just like, Van Halen filtered through punk and hardcore a little bit. And I don't know. I think that there's nothing that Richie does to me. Like, if you just listen surface level, like, it can sound kind of cheesy, right? When he pushes his voice, I think somebody mentioned that in the comments, or when he belts out those monstrous highs. But when you really dig into the lyrics and you really get a sense of where he's coming from, where he was writing from, it just pulls on the heartstrings for me, and it makes it so that I don't know. I don't see it as like a cheesy rock vocalist delivery. It feels like emotional catharsis to me when he sings, and the level and depth and breadth of his lyrics, I think, are what take it there and what prevent me from being able to enjoy other vocalists that maybe can sing or be as theatrical as him, but don't have the lyrics and don't have the substance to back it up. And whereas I feel like Richie Birkenhead really, really, truly does. And it takes this band to the next level for me. No, to answer your original question, there isn't anything on here that doesn't work for me. What about you?
I do, and they're very minor gripes. One of them is more just like in an alternate universe type situation. But the main thing and it's difficult to critique an album you've listened to for 25 years, which is how long I've had this record. And then also having, the connection with working at the label, and then meeting Richie later and becoming like a chess buddy with him. And I also have an Into Another tattoo, all this, so I'm like a little biased, I guess. But my biggest issue with this record is the snare drum. I just, it bugs me to no end, because it's just too upfront in the mix. It's too snappy. I don't think it was the right sound for this record. Unfortunately, nothing can really be done about that at this point, and they were working with what they had at the time. They were under a budget with Revelation as opposed to a budget with Hollywood Records. Later on, working with Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam 10 producer. So that's the main thing. The second one, again, this is like in an alternate universe, but it's also the thing why it makes some people love this album, is that there was almost 0 overdubs on this album in terms of guitar layering. So, a lot of people use that as a studio trick to make things sound more full and more big, or also when they're soloing, you can play a rhythm part underneath. But because they were a 4-piece band with just one guitarist, that's exactly how they recorded the album. So I think that's something that Jay was like, I'm not sure about on the record if there was overdubs. There is very little. Like what you hear is what the band sounds like when they play. Every part is covered live. I can attest to that because I've seen them play many times, and it sounds like you hear it on the record. Like, that's what Ignaurus is what Into Another sounds like. And it's very impressive regardless of if you like the music or not, because everyone in that band can just play. So, but the alternate universe thing would be if there was a version of this record where there would be a little bit more beefing up on some of the heavier parts, or like a rhythm holding it down while there's a solo happening, but the bass covers it so well. I mean, that bass tone is monstrous, and the way that Tony used to play is very melodic. I mean, he's not playing root notes the entire time like in punk and hardcore bands. Let me tell you that. I mean, he's playing like jazz lines. He's playing like thirds. He's playing sevenths. I mean, he's doing runs. He's doing arpeggios, and he's playing chords on the bass. So it works, but that's it for me. It would be those things. The snare is just really, really bothersome to me, but I can tune it out because I've heard this album hundreds of times.
Yeah, imagine listening to a 311 album for 25 years.
It's not quite that bad. It's like a thrash metal sounding snare.
Yeah, I guess because I'm heard it in the genre before, it doesn't impact me the same way that like a really tight piccolo does. But so I was thinking about this coming out in this year and coming out in Revelation. But even since you worked for Revelation, can you talk a little bit about like where would this get serviced to? Is this only to college radio?
Well, see, this was the issue. Yeah, I mean, it would definitely go to college radio. Which, I mean, does anyone listen to college radio anymore? I don't know.
But back in '94, it was huge.
Yeah, in '94, they tried to service it to. I mean, I didn't work for the label back then, so I can't speculate on what they did for that particular record. But I will say that what they talked about on the Where It Went podcast, which Steve mentioned a lot, is that they seem to not fit anywhere, and that was a big issue. Yeah, this was a big issue with the band, because when you have a label that is trying to promote you, when you have a PR company, whatever, like you have these people trying to work your record, they need to figure out what to do with you. What formatting are you in? What genre do you fall under? What bands do you package up to play with? And these are all things that this band struggled with, because they just don't have anybody that are contemporaries or sounds like them, where they can't be pigeonholed into a box very easily. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes what happens when you have these like really exploratory artists. Like they fall by the wayside because either they're over people's heads or the labels just don't know what to do with them. I think that's another play on that Ignaurus thing, the title of the record. That's something that they, and even on the reunion, when, after the Rev 25 show in 2012, they did a few little tours here and there. I went to see them on the East Coast. They did a week's worth of shows opening for Clutch, and that did not work at all. Let me tell you, like the Clutch fans hated them. Like, I mean, there was like a handful of us that were there that were big fans of Into Another, but no one that was there to see Clutch gave a shit about Into Another. And that's like, I'm saying that in all honesty, like I heard people saying, get off the stage, like booing them. Like it was like ridiculous. But that's how it was even back when they were getting packaged, like they played on tours with White Zombie. Their first show ever actually was White Zombie, but they also toured with them, and they toured with like Supergrass, like they just like all these things that just, yeah, like it doesn't make sense.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And yeah, so to answer your question, I don't know how you can promote this properly.
That's what I was thinking. And that's why Andy Wood from Mother Love Bone came up, because I was trying to think of contemporary in the same like vocal style, and that was the only one I could come up with. And then musically, a contemporary, I couldn't really figure out where they fit, because this doesn't sound like literally anything else that I've heard from 1994.
I think,
or even till now. The band that there was one band that came out in the early 2000s that would get compared a lot to them, which is Coheed and Cambria. I don't know if you guys ever listened to that band, but especially the earlier Coheed and Cambria stuff, a lot of people used to be like, hey, this is a more tamer, if you will, and maybe more poppy version of Into Another. So that was the one band where I think maybe if they went out with them, that would kind of work. But yeah, not much else.
We should do a show where we go back and rewrite history and like put together the correct package tours
Oh my God. Yeah.
Because I'm like racking my brain, like, so early 90s, 92,
You
93.
said Faith No More. Faith No More probably
Faith No
would
More.
work a little bit.
There were even like, not that these bands were successful, but like Galactic Cowboys was like this weird, like metal, proggy, pop, power pop kind of band that we've reviewed, I think talked about in the past.
Yeah.
I could see them touring with them. I could see them touring with like bands like Dream Theater, which were more prog metal. I think their audiences would be into like they would be more into the singing than a hardcore audience would be. And they would be able to connect with the musicianship. So I don't know, that might be a fun roundtable to do. It's like pull some of our bands that we reviewed that are odd and actually put them on tour with the right other bands.
All right, so wait a minute here. What did Dream Theater put out in the 90s? I gotta look this up.
You talking about the records?
Yeah. So what would have come out around this time? Images and Words?
Yeah, that came out like a year or two before this.
Okay, that's 92, and then Awake came out in 94.
And they toured with like Galactic Cowboys. They toured with King's X. They toured with 11 is another band at that time that like I could see this band mixing with.
You can see a King's X into another tour.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the weird thing is like, if let's say they do that, maybe that changed the trajectory of the next record. Maybe they don't go and record it with the guy from Pearl Jam and, the Seattle sound and go to Hollywood Records. Maybe they make an even more progressive tinged album because they're like touring with Dream Theater and King's X now.
Well, the thing about those audiences that would be different for this band is that there's no judgment. It's just about musicianship. Like there's no like image to it. Nobody cares what the image is really. It's like, it's due to like musicianship. So like you can get away with doing just about anything and dressing in any way you want. I could see that audience being more open to what this band actually sounds like. And getting into the heavier hardcore stuff as being like, hey, a new thing that they maybe aren't that familiar with, but sort of fits this sort of proggy kind of concept versus something music that's maybe a little simpler. It's more about attitude and message and not as heady as I think this is.
Well, and a band like Quicksand has like, I don't want to say not progressive elements, but it has like, there's tricky stuff going on in those songs. They're not just like 4/4 drop D, riffs, but it's not progressive. I mean, you wouldn't put Quicksand in front of Dream Theater, but even though this band and Quicksand are not that far off in some respects, but this band, I mean, that's what makes them so unusual, which is both frustrating and like very attractive. Let's get into our overall ratings for this record. We'll also discuss the poll as it sits right now. But first, Jay, how are you gonna land on this one? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I'm going to land on a worthy album. It's 44 minutes. It's good length. I'm still getting my head around Two Snowflakes. Maritime Murder, some aspects of that. Anxious, some aspects of that. But outside of those couple left turns, it holds together as an album for sure. Like, even though they explore all this space, because I think they keep it constrained to the, these four people with not a ton of overdubs, you end up with something that sounds like whole, right? It sounds like a thing conceived by four minds putting in probably a ton of hours and rehearsal space working on this material. So it's divergent, but also coherent. That makes sense. Unlike Mr. Bungle, which is divergent and schizophrenic.
Yes, exactly. This record, I don't know why, but this record made me think of Caven's Jupiter as sort of like this standalone, strange record that I can't make, that record to me is amazing, and this record is amazing. You're either going to get this and think it's a worthy album, or you would coaster it. That's why I mentioned coaster earlier. Now, for me, it's not a coaster. I mean, it's a worthy album because I'm still just confounded by it. And there's so much cool stuff happening. It is definitely not for someone who's looking for just chugging helmet riffs, grinding over and over again, or if you're into a really unexpected and unparalleled progressive post-hardcore emo album. I don't know how else to
I thought we settled on prog.
Oh, okay. Post-prog?
Post-prog.
You just invent post-core prog.
It's got to be a thing.
Yeah. Find out if that's a thing. If not, we're trademarking it right now. We got to jump on that as fast as possible.
Post-progressive, it is a thing.
God damn it. Why didn't I? What is post-progressive? Just like playing one note?
I'm looking for
forever.
Brian Eno. That's
okay.
The best example. Brian Eno, Talking Heads, even Radiohead is considered.
Wait, what? No, that's a bullshit category. Then they don't have it wrong.
Yeah.
You can't put Talking Heads and Brian Eno and Radiohead in the same category. Those are very clear. Whatever. Fuck that guy. Whoever came up with that. I'm going to ask just because it's required of me by the legal counsel. Where do you two gentlemen land on this record?
Yeah, of course I'm at a worthy album.
Right.
I think it's the band's high watermark. I think in a lot of ways they think of it as that too. They started, the first record comes out in 91 and they start touring and they start hitting it really, really hard. And what you just said, Jay, is absolutely right. They spent a lot of time in rehearsal spaces. The band was just playing nonstop. They were writing songs on the road during sound checks. This is just the result of them being at the absolute top of their game. And, regardless of all the marketing and business aspects that go into making a record and putting it out into the world and finding its audience, take all of that away and just simply as a piece of music, as an album, and for where they were as a band at the time and where they would go after this, it's that sweet spot. It's that actual sweet spot in their catalog that is undeniable in my opinion. So yeah, we're the album all the way.
So when we did the one before, were you like, oh, I can't wait to drop this bomb on them in 6 years?
Not right away, actually. No, I still hadn't fallen head over heels for it. But this guy would end up exposing me to it. Be like, what the hell is this? And be like, it's Into Another. How do you not know this record?
Your choice of verbiage there was a little concerning.
What did I say?
You got something about exposing yourself, and it was.
I didn't catch it either. I didn't catch that.
No, and so yeah, I don't know. Just kind of I finally found myself there, and I think strangely enough, I think it was Two Snowflakes. I think hearing that song out of context of the record and just walking into a room and having it be on and finally hearing it in a way that it just really worked for me, because it was, much like it's kind of baffling you a little bit, Jay. It was the same for me at first. I was like, I don't know what's going on with this song. But once you let it work its way into your soul, it's a gorgeous love song. It really is.
You also changed your pick. You originally had a different pick for
I
this
did
podcast episode. So when he changed it, I was like, oh. I
did. Yeah. All the scheduling back and forths. I was going to talk about a different album, but then I've been digging so hard into Ignaurus lately that I went back and revisited the Seamless review. And I think it was when I did that I was like, okay, I'm going to pick Ignaurus and show off a different side of the band. And I love our friend Chris Martz so much. So many of his picks are just right in my wheelhouse. And I haven't spoken to him directly about this, but I've been meaning to ask him, because he said in the episode that he found a lot of their older material to be meandering. He didn't specifically list any albums or anything. So part of me was, I was like, I want to do like a part 2 to the Into Another section on Dig Me Out. And like I said, it's a very different record. It's a very, very different record in so many ways. So I thought it would be fun to talk about in contrast to what y'all have already reviewed.
Excellent. And for formality's sake, Vadim?
Yeah, we're the album for sure. And I just want to say a couple things. First of all, I want to say on the critical listen, with critical ear, because I've been listening to this album for years. I actually didn't really realize how much acoustic guitar is on this album. There is quite a bit of it. In fact, I would almost say there's like 50-50 acoustic guitar to electric guitar on this album.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Which I didn't even notice. And when I say that, I mean one or the other, as we mentioned, little overdub. So it's not like an acoustic layered underneath of an electric, which is really interesting, because that's not common, especially now for post-hardcore bands, just to have like songs that are just straight acoustic songs, but they're not typical like strummy open chord acoustic songs. I mean, there's still complex acoustic songs. So two things I want to say really quick. The first thing is thank you for your guys' observations on this record. I just want to acknowledge that, because this is definitely a record that requires multiple listening, I think, to really kind of understand it. And with what you guys do, I imagine it's not very often where once you're done listening to an album for the week or 2 weeks or whatever, that you return to it, just because you're always moving on to the next thing and you have your own personal favorites and whatnot. So it's difficult for someone to just throw an album at you and just be like, here's all these amazing things about it, but you only have a week to really like hear it or to learn it or to recognize it. And you guys seem to have really done that on your listens. But this is definitely an album that reveals itself with subsequent listens. I want to stress that to anybody who would want to check this album out, where at first you might not get it or be into it even. The vocals, I think, are something that's difficult for most people to get into on their initial listens, but then when you really kind of see the bigger picture, they sometimes become the thing that's the best about the band. For me, it's still guitar, but those vocals, I mean, Richie's vocals are amazing and his lyrics are amazing. That's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to say was actually to you, Steve. I didn't tell you this on purpose. It's kind of funny that you did change your pick to this particular album, because the only other time I've been on the Dig Me Out podcast was when we reviewed Ida together. And there is a connection of this record to Ida, which is like just bizarre. There's a bizarre connection. So the back cover of Ignaurus, this painting right here, is done by Ida Pearl, who was also a member of Ida. She played violin in Ida, and she has also done paintings for a few of their album covers as well. So I just thought that was kind of funny that it ended up being where both of us are on a podcast episode and we have a connection between our two episodes. And you probably didn't even realize that.
No, I didn't think about that. That
is
Although when
so
I was
random.
When I was doing the research, I was like, wait, Ida Pearl did some artwork?
You asked me, you're like, hey, do you know who did this cover? And then I replied back, Ida Pearl, immediately. And you're like, damn, son, you know your shit.
He knows the artists behind all album artwork. That's from Storm Thorgensen, or what was his name? Strom Sermon?
No, Storm. You got it right the first time.
Okay.
And while we're talking about the art, though, I do just want to point out that this is a really beautiful album cover. Like, if you really get a chance to to look at it in a high res format, it came from a painting by a guy named Walt Paper. Is that his name? I believe. Yeah. Walt Paper. He's also he shows up in some of their music videos. And there was a funny story that the guys told about, like, taking this piece which was actually split into two different physical pieces, and having to walk it to a different place in New York City and find a place to properly be able to photograph it. And, we're we're talking about the early 90s, so it was still a little bit more difficult to do an album layout and all those things. So that was really fun to hear. And then this is what they did for their gatefold photo. It's literally a black and white photo of them shirtless, laying in a bed together, which, you know, just to further throw some
confusing imagery.
Right.
Yes.
Now I gotta tie that into all this.
Yeah, you gotta tie exactly.
What color is your vinyl?
This is Vadim's. You got the blue, I think.
I think it's blue. Yeah.
So that's the repress?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a repress, but I do have original seamless on clear.
How's the audio quality on the repress?
It's fantastic, minus that snare.
Well, because I was reading, I added this to my Discogs want list, and
Let's talk about this afterwards, because I could send you a copy.
Oh, okay.
I'll take care of it.
Thank you. I was just curious because there was different comments on different pressing colors. I was like, oh, I got to pay attention to that apparently. So our poll over at Patreon, interestingly, better EP won 64%, where the album 36%. Nobody voted for decent single. So, and that kind of makes sense because if you're really into sort of the guitar rock aspect of this, you might just like 5 songs because a lot of this album has acoustic on it. Or you might like the quieter stuff and the heavier stuff doesn't work for you. So I guess if you're not completely sold on this record, that kind of tracks. Are you surprised by that turnout, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of makes sense. I think I could see it being what I'm trying to say is polarizing. And then when you average the votes, you end up with an EP. So it's like either you're into it or you're not. And it's sort of like the average of that is going to end up being an EP.
Isn't there a band called Into It Over It?
There is.
They need to tour with this band. They call it the Into It tour. Are there any other bands
Into It? This man.
Into It twice.
Well, there's a metal band called Into Eternity, I think, as well.
Oh, there is. Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Yes. That Into It.
Sponsored by Into It.
The post Prague tour.
Sponsored by Into It.
Oh, I wanted to throw another little fun nug out there.
Fun nug.
2 of their music videos were made by a director of photography named Tim Ives that would go on to work on a lot of really big things, including Stranger Things.
Oh.
Yeah.
And
they said House of Cards too.
I cannot recommend Into Another music videos enough. There's only like I think 3 or 4 of them, but they are all awesome. Great music videos for anyone that might be curious.
If you want to watch music videos on YouTube in 480p quality.
This band had so many like classic, like, you know, bands that never broke through in the 90s, like bad things happening to them. When they signed to the major, the biggest thing that frustrated them about it was they had this record made on this huge budget that they just couldn't get into people's hands. In Europe, an entire CD pressing of this record was distributed with all of the proper artwork, but all of the music contained on the discs was for some trance band. It just a total error in CD manufacturing happened to them. One of the music videos, I believe, Mutate Me for Seamless. There was a mastering error that happened for the music being put onto the video. And so when it aired the one time it did on 120 minutes, the volume was just like absurdly low. Like, you know, everyone's just watching the program. It's all normal. And then suddenly this video comes on and you're like, wait, I can't hear anything, cranking it all the way up. And, you know, it's just like little things like that, but just like that add up. And you're like, man, this band, like everyone's confused and confounded by them. And then these types of logistical things are happening to them, which are completely out of their control.
I'm sure you guys have never heard of 90s indie bands going to major label and having woes.
Oh, that's new territory for us. Someone in this band when they were a child kicked a puppy, and that this is what haunted them for the rest of their life.
Well, funny you say that because they're all vegan, so that probably did not happen.
That's what turned them into a vegan.
Well, it could have. Oh, there you go.
That's
everyone except Tony.
That's the villain story, is that dog grew up to be the head of A&R at the label. It's like a top McGruff the crime dog situation, only he went into AR.
So it was a Hollywood dog. So
yes,
Pluto,
Hollywood dog, and he's driving around in a Ferrari Testarossa.
By the way, I had a friend who worked at AOL in the mid 2000s, and AOL and Disney and Hollywood were all somehow connected. There was a big merger.
Yes.
And I had asked her, I said, hey, can you go over to the Hollywood office and just ask anybody if there's any sort of Into Another stuff laying around, like maybe they've got some promo posters, there's just anything. And she said that not a single person in the office had ever heard of the band. Not one. So, but that's unsurprising.
There's probably a closet in there that somebody forgot about, and they like stuck a box of, it's just full of vinyl and posters and postcards and buttons, and it's someday a cleaning person will go up there and retrieve this banker's box, just be like, I don't know what it is, and they'll just throw it in a dumpster, and a million tears will fall unexpectedly from Into Another fans. No, a great cry in the universe, like like when Yoda died. Anyway, thank you so much for bringing this record, Stephen, to us, and thank you, Vadim, for in the roundabout way of introducing him to this record. This is a very interesting addition to our. It's not often that the second record, when we do two albums by a band, that you are like, is this the same band? Like usually there's bits and pieces you're like, oh, that's this is a logical step. Like, woof. This one,
maybe one day I'll bring Lush Life by Bowery Electric to you guys.
Okay. I have to say, if I had to redo that album review, I would probably have a different opinion of it now.
For beat, yeah.
Yeah.
You did mention that before. I just like busting your guys' balls.
just keep poking that wound. Just keep poking at it. We need to do.
Jay said I can't even rate this because this is so far from what I want out of music.
Did I?
Yeah.
That sounds like something you would say.
I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along those lines. I swear. Like, damn.
We got to do commentary on our original. We got to do commentary tracks on our original episodes.
A reaction videos on YouTube of our own episodes.
Yes.
What are we doing here?
Especially if we can pause it and be like, wait a minute, what the fuck did you just say?
Tim,
I think that's
my recollection of your pronunciation of this album title, like real talk, what got recorded and released was that you said Ignaurus. True or false?
What? You mean now or the previous one?
No,
on the Seamless episode. I'm pretty sure the way you pronounced it was Ignaurus.
Ignaurus. That sounds about right. Like, it sounds like my pronunciation skills were applied correctly. Ignaurus.
Ignore the anus.
Ignore the All right. Let's not descend into chaos here. If you would like to be like the gentlemen who have joined us this evening and suggest an album you can do so by joining the union at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com for as little as $2 a month. You get to vote in the polls, which happen every week. We have a month-by-month elimination tournament, 9 albums a week for the first 3 weeks. The 2 winners, top 2 vote getters of each poll moves on to the final round at the end of the month. And that picks our album review that come in at digmeoutpodcast.com on the suggested album page. Name of an album, name of a band, tell us why you're suggesting it, and it'll make it into one of our polls over at Patreon, where you get cool swag like t-shirts and stickers. And are we working on some new stuff, Jay, for the union?
We are.
Yes.
We're always working on something new.
We're in the lab. We're using the test tubes and the beakers and the little boily things that boil the thing. You know,
no,
like
man. I'm in the beat lab working it out.
Oh, you're in the beat lab. I'm sorry. Maybe that's why we haven't come out with anything new in a while. We're in the wrong labs. I'm trying to get some dinosaur DNA in here, all right? Got a park to build. Box newsletter. That's what comes to you every week when you sign up. It's full of new release information, 80s and 90s relevant music that's available on the physical and the electronic mediums, as well as we talk about documentaries, books, that kind of thing. 2 new reviews each week. Just recently talked about the Woodstock documentary that everybody is probably seen, the 3-part version on Netflix, not the earlier HBO one. Yeah, it's worth checking out. And you'll find more stuff like that at the box, which is available to our patrons. And if you like what you heard on this podcast, particularly if you are in the band Into Another and you liked what you heard on this podcast, maybe give us some positive feedback over at Apple Podcasts. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.